G'day YouTube, QuietPenguin here. Today I thought I would do a deck tech with my Miracle Mage deck. So let's get right into it. I'll show you the deck list. Here we go. This deck is called Miracle Mage. It's built similarly to the Rogue deck, the Miracle Rogue, in that we play one copy of Gadgetzan Auctioneer, and we also play one copy of Archmage Antonidas. So both of these guys want us to be playing a ton of spells, and so let me show you some of the spells that we're going to be playing. We're playing 2 copies of Flame Cannon and 2 copies of Frostbolt, both as early game removal. And then we've got 1 copy of Mirror Image. Now it's acceptable to play this card in the early game if we have to, but it's much better to save it for a Gadgetzan or an Archmage turn, if possible. Then going down the list, we've got a couple of secrets, which I'll talk about in a minute. We've got some mid-game removal pieces in a copy of Fireball and a copy of Polymorph. And we also finish it off with 2 copies of Flame Strike. And then, as you can see, we've also got a couple of ways to make spare parts, because spare parts are just amazing with Gadgetzan and Archmage. Like, I can't tell you how good they are. You just have to play it to really understand how good they are. So I started off by playing like a Mech Mage deck. That's where I got the idea for this deck from. And I had to cut a lot of the spare part stuff, sadly. So all that's left is 2 copies of Mechanical Yeti, which plays a big role in this deck, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about him later on. And a single copy of Toshli, which kind of serves as like a more expensive additional copy of the Mech Yeti. Okay, so that's basically how the deck is getting its spells. So let me run you through the early game, and then the mid game, and then I'll talk a little bit about our general game plan. So our early game minions are 2 copies of Mana Worm. Now this is pretty standard in a lot of Mage decks. Mana Worm is just an insane card. It's really, really good. And because we're playing a bunch of these spells, it's even better in this particular list. It's also fun for us to just run it out on turn 1 as a 1/3, particularly if we can follow it up with a turn 2 Flame Cannon or Frostbolt, or even Unstable Portal, which I'm going to talk a bit more about later on. And just make it a 2/3. It's either going to be able to attack face if necessary, but this deck aims to trade off all its minions, especially in the early game. We just want to keep the board relatively clear and take as little damage as possible. Yep, so Mana Worm's a great card. Moving on into the 2 drops, I've kind of got these guys next to each other. We've got 1 copy of Annoyatron and 1 copy of Explosive Sheep. Now these are primarily for the aggressive decks in the format. They're both really strong. Annoyatron in particular just takes a lot of resources to get through, and Explosive Sheep can sort of prevents our opponent from going too wide. And we can also, if it's turn 4 or later, we can actually just play our Explosive Sheep and then spend 2 mana and shoot it with our hero power to trigger it straight away. So it kind of gives us an additional AoE effect, which is really nice. Moving on, we've got 2 copies of Mad Scientist. Mad Scientist is really, really good in this deck, simply because we want to be trading off early game anyway, which he does spectacularly. And we also get some value off him as well, because he can search either 1 copy of Duplicate or a copy of Iceblock. Duplicate's really good in this deck because it gives us an additional source of card advantage, and in particular it's really good with some of our minions, such as, in fact, almost all of our minions, Duplicate is really good with. It's great with Mana Worm, it's great with Annoyatron, it's acceptable with Explosive Sheep or Mad Scientist, although it's quite unlikely that we'll get Mad Scientist in play with a Duplicate, but it's possible. It's acceptable with ACO of Pain, and then it's great with any of these other minions. So it's fantastic with Mechanical Yeti, with Sludge Bela, Gadgetzan, Sylvanas, Toshli, Archmage, or even Alexsandra. That has happened, guys. It's possible. Okay, so Duplicate's a really good card. And then our other secret is a single copy of Iceblock. So this is a relatively late addition to the deck, but it's been really strong for me so far. I often found that I'd get to say turn 8 or turn 9, I'd be able to play out an Archmage or a Gadgetzan, one of these guys, and then I'd be able to protect it either with like a spare part that gives stealth, or maybe I could play out the mirror image, or maybe I could clear my opponent's board. But generally I was on quite a low life total by that stage, and often my opponent could assemble a kill somehow. So maybe I'd be playing against a hunter and he'd just have the kill command and hero power, or warlock could have charge minions such as the 5-mana demon or something. Anyway, there was often a case that my opponent could just finish me off, and I was just one turn away from winning with our Gadgetzan or Archmage combos. So I added Iceblock, and often we can get it out for free off of Mad Scientist, which is really, really good. Or we can generally find sort of a turn somewhere around the mid game to sort of plop it out there if we don't have too much else going on. And all that means is that we just feel so much safer. We can make our play. We can chuck out our Archmage or our Gadgetzan with some backup, and we know that we're going to get to live to the next turn. So it's been really, really good in this deck. I'm really, really glad that it's there. So that's our secret package. Moving on to our other 3-drop, we've got 2 copies of ACO of Pain. So we're more than happy to just run this guy out on turn 3, just to block, maybe trade, maybe eat a minion, and just replace itself. If all that this card does is trade with an enemy minion and draw us 1 card, we're happy. But of course, there's times where it can do so much more than that. If we play it out on, say, turn 5 or turn 7, we can shoot it with our hero power and get a card immediately and leave a 1/2 ACO of Pain behind. And that's often going to get us another card. So we're drawing deeper into our deck. And because we're kind of playing like a control-y combo list, we need lots of cards in hand. So ACO of Pain is really good for that. Okay, so we've talked about Fireball and Polymorph, so we'll move on to Mechanical Yeti. Now, Mechanical Yeti is just amazing in this deck, okay, guys? It does so much. So first off, in most of our aggressive matchups, we treat this guy as a 4-mana minion that trades with 2 of their cards, okay? So maybe it'll eat a minion and like half a removal, like what's left of the Yeti will eat like a removal spell, or it'll trade with 2 minions, or even in worst case scenario, it just trades with 1 of their better cards, okay? So we're already happy if we're doing that, because like I said before, all we want to be doing is trading off in these matchups, okay? Trade off, get to our late game, because our late game is just so much better than theirs. Okay, but that's not all he does. He also gives us a spare part, which just works awesome with our combo, with our Archmage or our Gadgetzan. Yeah, so Mechanical Yeti is just one of the best minions in our deck. We're almost always happy to see him in the aggressive matchups and in the control matchups. Okay, because if we're playing against a control deck, then he's our like front line of attack. Okay, if we're playing against like Control Warrior and they're spending like the first 3 turns not doing much, maybe they've played like the axe, the 3/2 weapon, or maybe they've played like an ACO of Pain or the 1/4 that gives armor. They're fluffing around, they're gaining some armor, we don't care. This is one of the few cards in our deck that we can be playing early and lets us put pressure on our opponent, which is great. We really want to be trading even in those matchups, and Mechanical Yeti forces them to do something about it. So Mechanical Yeti, fantastic card in this deck. I love it. Moving on to our 5-drops, we've got 2 copies of Sludge Bela, and he's a pretty typical minion. Okay, he sees play in lots of decks, generally as a defensive minion, which is exactly what he is here. He's really sticky, which means that he has a good death rattle ability. He leaves a guy behind if he dies. And yet he's just so hard to remove. He costs the average deck so many resources to deal with. He's really good, and if we happen to get an extra 2 copies of him with a duplicate, we're just going to win that game so easily. Sludge Bela is a really, really good card. Gadgetzan's one of our combo pieces, which I'll talk about in a minute. Sylvanas Windrunner, awesome minion. Whether we're ahead on board, she's a great play. If we're behind on board, she's a great play. And there will be games where, unfortunately, we just can't combo off for whatever reason. Maybe we don't have enough cards in hand. Maybe the game's not going to last that long for whatever reason. And in those kind of matchups, Sylvanas is just one of your best friends. Okay, she's a 5/5 for 6. She's got great stats, and when she dies, we're just eliminating any pressure our opponent has by stealing one of their minions. Great card. Toshli is just kind of like a bigger, badder Yeti. By badder, I mean more badass. A 5/7, he's got fantastic stats. Played out on a sort of even to slightly behind board, he's just going to take over. 5/7 is really hard to deal with. He's going to eat 2 or 3 of our opponent's cards most of the time. And he has a battle cry and death rattle. Give us a spare part. And as I was saying before, spare parts are so important to this deck. We don't have a lot of ways to get them. As you can see, we've only got 3 cards, so they're really important. So if we can hold them until the late game, when we've got a Gadgetzan or an Archmage, we're going to do great. And so Toshli really plays well into that. Then we've got 2 copies of Flame Strike. We're playing this because, as I've been saying, we want to trade off in that early game. As you can sort of see here, we've got a ton of early game, so we're doing pretty well there. Then our mid game can start to drop off a little bit. Say we don't draw an ACO of Pain, or we don't draw a Yeti, or we don't draw a Sludge Bela or something. Occasionally it's possible that the board, around by turn 7, it's starting to look a little bit out of control. And in those cases, Flame Strike is your best friend. AoEs are fantastic catch-up mechanisms, and I always want access to them in my control decks. And then we've got our Archmage, which we've talked about. And the last card in our list is a copy of Alexsandra. Now, if we're doing all this early game trading because we want to trade with this deck, we just want to get to the late game. But that strategy has consequences. It generally means that by around turn 8 or 9 of the game, we've dealt with the board pretty well. Hopefully our opponent's really low on cards. Hopefully we've got a few more cards than them just because of our cards like Duplicate or Acolyte of Pain, or maybe we've got like 2 cards and like 2 spare parts or something. So we're pretty ready to go. But our opponent's still on 30. We haven't done any damage yet because all we've been doing is trading. And in those situations, Alexsandra is your best friend. Just being able to play an 8/8 on the board, which heaps of decks can't deal with, and just going, bam, your life total is now halved. Your life total is 15. That's so powerful. It's really, really good in this deck. And in a pinch, we can even use it on ourselves as life gain. So it kind of acts like a second copy of Iceblock in that aspect. It's really, really good in this deck. And that's the deck for us, guys. So, in general, we want to be trading in the early game, building up our hand until we can combo off with our Gadgetzan or our Archmage. And then we just get so far ahead, no one can keep up with us. It's insane. And I'm going to show you that, guys, in some games. And I just realized I forgot about one card, and that's the Unstable Portal. Now this card's super solid in general. If we get a really good minion off it, a legendary or something, it can often win the game on its own. But it's even better in this deck. So early game, it's a fine play, particularly if we've played like a turn 1 Mana Worm. We're getting extra advantage there because it's a spell and a minion. And then mid game, it's alright if we've got nothing else to do, we'll play it if we have to. But we really want to hold it until the late game if we can. It's because it's so good with Gadgetzan and Archmage. If we get an average minion, it's going to cost 3 less, which means we can probably play it for 3. And that's fine because we're going to get to rush the board a bit more in those later stages when we really need to. But it also triggers Gadgetzan and it also triggers Archmage. The card is awesome. It's just so much value packed into one little card. I love it. And then this deck makes better use of this card than any other Mage deck I've seen. Okay, guys, so that's the deck. As you can tell, I'm pretty excited to get to the games and play it. So check out my games with this deck. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next video.